Hey there. Today is the 23rd of April, April 23rd, and we got something significant happening in the sky this week. And I want to talk to you about it because it deserves our full attention. It's not so much a list of dates and degrees, although I will talk about those, but as living experience. And many of us are already feeling, it may be a lot of us are feeling in our bodies, our electrical system, in our minds, like the sort of air changing. And this is because we've got on the 25th of April in the United States and early hours of the UK on the 26th, we have Uranus entering the sign of Gemini. So you can see this chart is the 23rd of April. And I'm going to go 2 days ahead. And that's the 25th now. And you can see that on the 25th at 20, this is British summertime I'm using on this chart. You can see at 2044, if we go hours ahead, you will see that Uranus will move into the sign of Gemini, which it did last year, and then it went retrograde. But this is the final call, and we begin this new journey. So it's not a minor transit because Uranus takes approximately 84 years to complete its full journey around the chart. So you see here, it's an 84-year journey, about 7 years per sign. And it's with its ingress into a new sign, it will mark a shift in the collective atmosphere. And this is generational, okay? This is a generational planet. And we will not see this again in our lifetime. So for many of us, none of us will, I don't think. So anybody that's alive now, unless they live to their, I don't know, 184 years, it depends how long we live, but we'd have to live a long, long time in order to see it again. So whatever's stirring right now has reasons because Uranus is a disruptor. It disrupts things. It's an awakener. It's the planet that cracks open whatever has become too fixed, too calcified, too comfortable in its own assumptions. And if you take that it's going into Gemini, which is the mind, so it will begin to do its work in that area. And it doesn't particularly do it gently. It does not knock on a door. It arrives. And when it arrives, it will arrive in our lives individually, depending on what house and what aspects that planet is making to the rest of our own planets, if we look at our own charts. So for me, at 0016, which I think is the 30th of April, it will be conjunct my natal sun. So look to your chart and see, because it's doing some nice aspects for me as well. And we need to, it will help us if we know what it's doing in our chart and what house it's in. So it's not particularly comfortable, but if we look back across the decades, we know that the Uranian ingress always finds something essential was liberated, even the liberation when it came at great cost. And I think a lot of us are looking to be liberated, and it will be in the sign of Gemini, of the mind, of communication, information, language, the nervous system, the electrical system, the way we process and exchange and transmit what we know or believe we know. It's a sign also associated with duality, with twin nature, Gemini, of things, with the capacity to hold more than one reality and to speak across divides. So when Uranus enters Gemini in a few days, what is being revolutionized is not simply technology, because through technology, we will certainly it will be part of the story. And what is being revolutionized is thought itself. So we may have some revolutionary thoughts about our own lives in the area. For me, it's going to be landing in my 7th house. So this is to do with my relationships, all types of relationships. And the categories we use to understand reality as well, the way we may have been looking at things, the channels through which information travels, the gatekeepers who have stood at those channels, the very question of what counts as knowledge and who is permitted to say so. because, we have been quite dictated to with many things, even, if we look back with pharmaceuticals, that even that's changing. There are lots of things with communication, what's allowed, what's, where we've been told that we can't have our own opinion about something. I think we're going to see a lot of changes in that, and also in computers and the way we use them too, in certain laws coming forth as well. And so we have been here before with Uranus in Gemini. You can see it here with my pointer. And it's going to be conjunct Sedna here, which is in the third house. And Sedna, that's if it's in Gemini here that I'm showing you, this symbolism here. So it gets to the heart of the matter of communication, and it's the written and spoken words are powerful tools in our lives. In the third house, our intuition is strong. We need to learn to trust our own insights and to respect the hidden depths and see that we see in others, friends as well, and our individual families. You may unwittingly stir up hidden feelings in others. It's almost as if you have taken a big stick and put it in the ocean and stirred it all up. So other people may not be as capable as you of combining heart and mind. So this is collective. So we're all in this together. And there may be a need to use our powers for the good of others and biding our time and listening. So that's another skill with Gemini as well, that we, it's not just about our own thinking. It's like having the ability to sit and listen to other people's stories. And that is a gift if we can do that, because, many of us want to tell our stories, but we haven't got the capacity to listen. So it's good if we can monitor ourselves, which I've had to learn to do being a Gemini. I have learnt to slow down a bit and listen to other people's stories, and also to ask them how they are, and ask them, if they've given me information about their lives, then I'll refer to people that they've told me about and ask them how those people are. It's checking in with others. And with this being in Gemini, this is, it's so slow. Sedna, the story of Sedna as well is very interesting. It takes 10,500 years to work its way around the sun. So, really, it's a long, long, slow journey that this planet is on. So Uranus was last in Gemini between 1941 and 1949. And the world was at the crucible of the Second World War and its immediate aftermath. So if we think about what happened to communication and information during those years, the breaking of the Enigma code at Bletchley Park, the entire hidden architecture of intelligence and counterintelligence, the propaganda machines on all sides that use language and images and broadcast to shape what millions of people believe to be real. So this is where we're at now. Again, it's like, what are we believing to be real? I've got a tendency now, if I read, information that's on social media, that I'll double check it, because I think we have to do that for ourselves. We have to figure out what, is this story true, rather than just get emotionally caught up in something. And also the development of radar, that was at the last Gemini, Uranian Gemini energy, of the first computers, of systems for processing information at speeds that had never been attempted before. And then after the war, the beginning of the atomic age, which was itself a crisis, a knowledge, of knowledge as well, a moment when humanity confronted the consequences of the splitting of the atom, the atom bombs as well, the splitting of matter itself had been made possible. And that era asked, with enormous urgency, what human beings do with knowledge that outstrips their wisdom, because it's all very well having knowledge and creating things, but, do we have the wisdom to understand what we are actually creating and what the purpose we are creating it for? And it's still a question that we've never fully answered, because we can see with the technology of war, some of the things that are being used in war are really quite horrifying. And this is, very challenging, because if we've not experienced war and there are people that are experiencing wars, it's very harrowing. And I still think that we are still not fully conscious of, how we're causing destruction, or taking accountability for it. So to go back further to the cycle of 1857 to 1864, again, that would have been Uranus in Gemini. And we've got a very different but seismic moment. The telegraph was transforming how news and information crossed continents and oceans for the first time in human history. And a message could travel faster than a person carrying it. And the implications of that collapse of distance was profound and probably disorientating, if you can imagine, what that would have been like at that time. And it was also in the period of that Darwin published on the origin of species in 1859, a book that did not simply introduce a scientific theory, but fundamentally disrupted the categories through which Western civilization had understood its own origins. Again, Gemini and Uranian energy, and it was changed its place in the natural order of things. Things changed the way we saw things. And it was also the period of the American Civil War, which was, among other things, a war about two incompatible realities, two versions of what human beings are and what they're worth, colliding with a devastating force. So here we do have Uranus, and I will tell you, just to keep you here, I'm going to talk about Chiron afterwards briefly when I finished with Uranus, because this is going to be moving into Taurus on the 20th of June, June 20th, 2026. So I want to bring this in because this is the wound, and the collective wound, and then also our individual wound. And it will be interesting to see what's happening with that. So we have a pattern. Uranus in Gemini tends to arrive, it's about infrastructure of thought, systems, which we collectively decide what is true and who gets to say so, all thrown into question. And we can see that's been happening already. Uranus was in Gemini briefly last year, if we look back to last summer, and 2025. And it tends to arrive when information technologies take a leap that changes now, adjust how we communicate, but what communication means. And it tends to arrive when ideas that have been suppressed or denied suddenly force their way into the open. So there are ideas and situations which we knowingly, personally know going on at the moment that are being suppressed or denied. And sometimes, these things can, when they are pushed into, that we're not suppressed and they're no longer denied, then we can be liberated from something, but it can be very challenging because it can be quite shocking with the Uranian energy as well, but also it can be liberating. And we're entering this territory again on April 26, 2026. So we're already living through a crisis of information. I think it's very overwhelming for many of us. I certainly have had to, reel myself in, and I've removed some of my apps from my phone, because I don't want to be disturbed with, the Twitter flashing up and Facebook and all of this. So I've hidden them. So if I want to go and look at them, I have to physically push more buttons to go and look, which is very good because that way I'm not being distracted. So the crisis of information and the question of what is real, what is true, and who can be trusted to tell us has been destabilized in ways that are bewildering and exhausting. The Epstein case, and there's other things, but, depending on what we're working on in our own lives and what we're hoping for humanity, it will affect us individually different ways. And, the care of children and making sure that they're not, that children do not suffer from abuse as well. So we've got a lot of work to do around that. So it is bewildering and exhausting. And in some quarters, it's terrifying, some of the things that we've been subject to hearing, but things that actually do go on. And in wars as well, what's happening to children and adults as well. So, the artificial intelligence is a process of changing what communication, language, and knowledge mean. And there's no way like that we can fully predict the outcome. And I think there are positives and negatives as to many things. There are two sides to things. And the Uranian disruption was already underway before the ingress. So we're already feeling this. And what happens now is that the energy is going to intensify and accelerate and begin to demand responses from us rather than simply, just washing over things or them washing over us. So, what else about Gemini? Let's see. Gemini also rules the nervous system. And I think this is worth really thinking about. So, many people, are reporting overwhelm in society, of information saturation, of a mind that cannot find stillness. And because there is always something else arriving. So, that's something I did where I removed the apps from my phone so that I'm not disturbed or seeing things that are bringing me or putting me in fight flight or causing me to get distracted. So we can choose what information we're going to be taking in to a degree. So we owe it to ourselves to find stillness, because if we're always in stress, then the body takes that on board, and then we suffer in various ways, like physically, if we don't find stillness, because there's always something else. If there's always something else arriving and something demanding to be processed, and demanding a response. And the Uranus in Gemini is likely to amplify this before it resolves it. So it's going to be amplified. And if we can hold it, toward a different quality of mind, not faster, but more discerning. So to take a step back and to have the awareness to be in the moment when we can, just to find our feet on the ground and, think about how we're going to respond to something. So it's also the signaling of whether Rupert Sheldrake, somebody I follow, Rupert Sheldrake, he talks about consciousness and telepathy. So I am wondering with this as well, how that will work, in society. It's quite an interesting subject. He's worth checking out on YouTube, his YouTube channel, Rupert Sheldrake, on telepathy and consciousness. So it's not a faster, but the just being discerning and more connected, but not to every single signal that's coming in. So we need that slowing down. And the twin nature of Gemini asks us not to collapse complexity into false certainty. So, you don't have to have something in stone. It's okay to not know the answers and not know what's next. And that would be the Uranian energy, that we're really not going to know what's next. And we don't want false certainty by holding on to the tension. It's okay not knowing. And really, that's an intelligent response, as an adult, to say, well, it's okay, I don't know. But we can do things for ourselves that bring some stability, like we can do some exercise, we can eat well, we can nurture ourselves and take time for ourselves as well, and switch off when we need to. So there's always going to be a lot more to say about how this transit unfolds, but simply I think it's more about noticing what is moving in our thinking and our communications, and then what we feel compelled to say. There's something said that with Uranian energy, it's like, I think Jeff Wolfgreen mentioned, he wrote the Pluto books, Jeff Wolfgreen, Evolutionary Astrology. The thing with Uranus is, it's like the Aquarian energy as well. It's like, I know it's not in Aquarius, but it is ruled, it's connected to Aquarius. So it's when something keeps coming up to pay attention to it. If you keep thinking, I must do that, I must do that. And I'm not talking about small little things like, I must wash the dishes, or I must, remember coffee when I go to the shop or something. I'm talking about real, when there's something coming through, something being communicated to ourselves, whether it's looking, doing something for our body, getting a checkup, following a path that maybe we wouldn't have dreamed of before. And Uranus and Gemini, but it's going to be with us for the next 7 years. And it's the revolution of the mind is beginning. And I want to move on to something else to counterweight this, because Uranus and Gemini is asking us to look at what is happening above the net, like the mind and the collective unconscious as well, and in the realm of thought and communication, information. And there's another planetary movement coming that I wanted to look at, and it's happening below, which is in Taurus. Yeah, it's in the body, in the earth, in the ancient, slow, deeply felt territories of physical existence and material worth. And this is Chiron. So you see Chiron here. I'm going to go, so it's going to be the 20th of June, and I'm on the 26th of April. So let's go days. I'm going to go months. I'm going to go 1, 2, and then I'm going to go back. So days, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So you can see on this chart, this is the June the 19th, 2026. And you can see here that Chiron takes 50 years around the chart on average. So it's a slow moving planet, and it's slower than Saturn. And clearly Uranus is slower than Chiron, but there is a bridge here with these two. So if I go hours ahead, we'll see 2958. I'm looking here, Chiron, that green sign. So 20th, there you go. So in the USA, it will be the 19th, June 19th, and in the UK, actually, it will be June the 19th. This is the UK chart. Lester, I'm forgetting what I'm looking at. So Chiron is moving into Taurus 19th, 20th of June. And if you're not familiar with Chiron, it's a centaur, it's body, it's part, Chiron is the mythology is part man and part horse, and discovered in 1977. And it's become one of the most psychologically resonant points in the birth chart for those of us who work within a depth orientated tradition. And it's often called the wounded healer. And that phrase, though it has become familiar to the point of losing its, edge or its meaning, points to something genuinely deep. It's really, Chiron represents a wound that does not simply heal in the conventional sense. So we all have Chiron in our chart somewhere, doing something in our natal chart. And then on the collective chart, we've got the transit. So this is transiting at 0 degrees Taurus. It will be in my 5th house. So you can look where that is for you. So Chiron in the 2nd house, which would be, because it's Taurus, I'm just going to read something here from some details I've got. So it's where you suffer pain through financial loss or fear, financial insecurity. Your early emotional wounds have led to poor self-esteem. You search for self-worth, and it may mean that you are able to later in life help others find their own worth. So I think with Chiron in Taurus, it will be a crisis of values, and it's where we may experience a lack of self-worth and overcompensate by trying to, gain more money and possessions. And we also may distrust our body or feel that our body is not beautiful. This is the definition I'm reading from my solar fire. And you will learn to rely on your own, and you will learn to rely on your own and your body's experience, and could become a healer. So that's the overall picture of what it means. But really, it's not as cut and dried as that, because each of us will have a different placement for this. And then we'll also have this working in our chart in different ways, making aspects to different planets on our own chart. So Chiron represents the wound that does not simply heal in the conventional sense. It represents an initiation, a wounding, a place in the psyche where something was broken open, and where over time the very place of breaking comes from the source of the deepest wisdom we carry. So the wisdom, unfortunately for all of us, but we know, many of us know this to be true, that the wisdom generally comes through the wound that we've, had to carry in our lives. And everybody carries wounds of one sort or another. For me, Chiron is in my fourth house, conjunct Saturn. So I was very wounded as a child in the family environment. And, if it's in your second house, then it's going to mean something else. So you can, look at that for yourself. So it's the healer who has been through the fire is not the same healer as the one who has only read about it. So that's the thing. So it's about lived experience. So we've all got lived experience in different areas of life, and we're all valuable to each other with these different experiences. We can give our wisdom to others, and others give their wisdom to us. So Chiron in the chart in the sky marks precisely that distinction. And Chiron has been moving through Aries for several years now. And Aries is the sign of the self, of the right to exist, which I think has really come about that with the move of Neptune and Saturn. I can see around me collectively that a lot of people are at a point where they're taking hold of themselves, and Aries is a sign of the self. So it's the right to exist. And I think we're coming to this point at the moment that we have the right to exist, which is a big wounding. That is the wound if you are born with Chiron in Aries. And we've had Chiron in Aries for the last several years. So, it's the first breath, the first cry, the primal assertion. This is Aries, that I am here, I have a right to be here. The wound in Aries is the wound of that assertion being denied. So we were denied this whilst we had COVID going on, that we were being denied our sense of self during that time. So it's interesting, the wound in Aries, the wound of that assertion being denied or punished or met with annihilation. It is the wound that asks at the most fundamental level whether my existence is permitted. And again, if we really look closely at what was going on with the whole COVID period, we can see there was a lot of loss, and, a lot of people affected in different ways through different things. And it was like telling people without so many words that they didn't have the right to exist if they, took a vaccine, didn't take a vaccine, couldn't visit people in hospital, all of these different things that went on. It was like you didn't have the rights. And it's whether also I'm allowed to take up space. That's the other thing with that. Am I allowed to take up space? So really, we're coming to this thing where we can now become more embodied when it moves into the sign of Taurus. And whether the force of life in me is welcome or dangerous or shameful. So, we've all got shameful, we've all got shame to some degree. I was thinking about this earlier today, and I thought it's really sad sometimes the things we feel shame around, or we've been made to feel shame around, because the shame has not been ours. It's been shame that's been passed on through generations, or we've been made to feel it because of expectations of others. So many people will have felt the Chiron in Aries years as a period of reckoning with exactly those questions, and often, painfully for many of us, often in ways that surfaced very old material. And the work of that transit that's coming to an end has been at its deepest the reclamation of the right to simply be, which I actually feel now I've got the right to be. I don't know if it's because I've had my second Saturn return in the last so many months, or whether, it's a mixture of things. But I'm hoping a lot of people feel that you have the right to be, because there's nothing more disconcerting that feeling that we haven't. So when Chiron moves into Taurus on the June the 20th, 19th, 20th, there's going to be this shift and the question changes because it's no longer in Aries at this point. But I will tell you it's going to retrograde back into Aries at some point, and then it will go direct again. So continuing, the question changes, or rather it deepens and becomes more specific. So Taurus is the sign of the body, not the body as the concept, but the body as a lived experience, a sensation, as the place where existence is actually felt rather than simply thought. It is the sign of the earth, of groundedness, of what it means to be held and contained and nourished by physical reality. And it's a sign of worth and value, of what we believe we deserve, of the relationship between our sense of our own value and our capacity to receive material sustenance and safety and care. Because we all have the right to those things. You know, let's face it, we're on this beautiful, abundant earth. And, you know, there's many people that are not experiencing this, or maybe in our own lives, we've, you know, seen both sides of the coin where we've had and not had. And then there are people that have just been born into and you know another area where they've had all of the things, but again they could still be disembodied, you know, because if you're given everything again and you've never had to really work for anything, then that could be very challenging as well. Everybody's got something. It's not, this isn't a monetary thing, but clearly this is the exchange that goes on our planet. So these two things, the body and worth, are not separate in Taurus, and they are not separate in life. You know, the body and the worth are connected. And for many people, I think, particularly for those who have experienced wounding in early life that was enacted upon or through the body, and I can relate to that, the question of what one's body is worth, of whether the body deserves to be protected and nourished and treated with tenderness. And it's not an abstract philosophical question. It is a wound that lives in the tissues. It lives in us. If you stressed out all the time, you can have, you know, like so many ailments from going through a stressful period, or, you know, somebody's upset us, or we've had some loss. The body takes the toll, you know, it's sort of, so we need to soften as much as we can. It is something carried in a way one inhabits physical space in the relationship to food, which is so important, you know, all of the different nutrients from food. And this is so meaningful, you know, to the body, to healing and rest as well, you know, making sure we're really rested and we're in an environment where we're able to rest. You know, there are people in the world that are in environments that they can't rest. There are children going home to parents tonight where the children can't rest because they're, you know, living in an abusive household, as an example, or so many different variations, you know. So we need rest, and we need touch, we need love, and we need pleasure. We need nice things for ourselves, the physical as well, in the, you know, the deep wordless sense of whether one deserves to be sustained. It's like, you know, do I deserve to be sustained? And the answer is, for me, it's a definite yes. And, you know, where can I sustain myself, and where, when I help others, you know, as well, then it's like bartering, like giving something and something in return. So Chiron in Taurus will ask us to bring that wound into consciousness and to begin, however, slowly and carefully, because Taurus is that way, the work of healing it in the body rather than only in the mind. So this is interesting because we're going to have this Gemini, Uranian energy, and we're going to have Chiron in this situation. That will be a semi-sextile at that point. So, you know, it's good to look at the aspects of what's happening in a chart as well. But I'm not doing too many aspects today. I just wanted to share this information. So, you know, because there's a timeline here, because it's more complex than a single ingress state. Chiron will enter Taurus, but it will station retrograde. I think it's August the 2nd, 2026. And then it will move back into Aries. And then it will station direct on 8th of January in Aries. And then it will return to Taurus on April 15th, 2027. Forgive me if I don't have those exact dates, but that's what I got from when I was looking on my solar fire and taking the chart forward. So this is the rhythm Chiron, and it's characteristic of the way of deep healing, and how it actually works. It does not proceed into straight lines. It moves forward into new territory, then retreats. So Taurus, sort of works that way. It moves into new territory and then retreats, asking whether we have truly, you know, got the point, what we found there before we're ready to go further. So it's a bit slow, slowing down and looking after the body. And the retrograde passage into Aries is not a setback when it does that. It is a bit more time. The psyche's way of saying there is still something here in Aries, which there is. There's still something here in Aries going on. And then there's something about the right to exist that needs tending to before we fully inhabit the bodywork of Taurus. The January 2027 direct station, and then April 2027 return to Taurus. It will carry everything that was gathered in that retrograde passage. And the Taurus work that begins then from April 2027 onwards will be richer for it, no doubt. Because at that point, we're dealing with Gemini and the mind and Uranian energy. So we're going to get a lot of that going on. And we may, get to a point where we realize that we have to take some action to look after ourselves, value ourselves, protect ourselves, and, be kind to ourselves. Because Taurus is ruled by Venus, which is beauty as well. It's more than beauty, but that's something that comes to mind. And so this is the bridge between two movements I've been describing here. Uranus in Gemini is revolutionizing the mind, the nervous system, the way we think and communicate and process information. And Chiron in Taurus is asking us to ground, to descend from the speed and fracture of mental life into a slower, deeper, more ancient intelligence of the body. And in some ways, they are pointing in opposite directions. One is going outward into the electricity, like thunderstorms and, volcanic energy of thought. And the other is going downwards into the earth and the flesh and the felt sense, grounded in myself. But they're not in conflict, they're in dialogue, which is really beautiful. And the revolution of the mind that Uranus in Gemini is initiating will not be sustainable, will not produce anything of lasting value unless it's rooted in something. And that, the financial stuff, I don't know enough about that, but I can just observe what's going on. The financial stuff is changing. Like they want to go to the coins and, Bitcoin, and maybe not Bitcoin, but just getting everything running through technology, which could, the removal of money, we can still barter with people as well. We can, if we've got friends that are doing different things, we could say, hey, I can do this for you if you do that for me. It's offering our services is a very good thing to do, exchange with people close to us. So Uranus in Gemini is initiating and will not be sustainable, will not produce anything of lasting value unless it's rooted in something. So unless the thinking is connected to feeling, there's no point in thinking if we've got to bring our feelings into our thinking, and the information also then the wisdom, and speed into depth, saying something worth saying. And Chiron in Taurus is offering us that routine, which is really wonderful that that's taking place. It is asking us to remember that we are not disembodied intelligences floating in a cloud of, in a stream of data, but we're creatures of the earth, and with bodies that carry history and wounds and extraordinary resilience. I think of all of the things my body's been through and my emotional life over the years. I've had a very resilient and bouncing back, and that the healing we most need in this moment of the collective crisis is not a faster processor. We don't need all of these machines to fix us. Well, they're creating, apparently, I say they, I mean, machines are going to being created apparently that are going to help us to live to 150. I am playing there, but I'm just giving, we can have all of these technologies, but basically I think the body is very sensitive. It can be very strong. but it does age as well. We have the aging process, and we have our aches and pains. We are human, and we will be for a very long time, I think. And so we got the collective crisis is where we're at right now. We're seeing it, and we need ground to stand on. So I will return to these as they unfold. So if you have Gemini, Taurus, or Aries prominent in your chart, and planets in the early degrees, you may want to look at that. I can do that with you. I do read charts, and I'm happy to look at some of the depth of understanding of charts, and in a very gentle way. I'm not so much into predictions, but you can definitely see the felt experience when you begin to look at a chart and what's going on to understand the psyche more. Carl Gustav Jung used astrology, and that was one of my not my only reason for loving astrology, but one that I refer back to. So if we can sit with what's stirring, and the sky is doing its own thing. It's a mirror to us. It's holding it all. It's a mirror, in my view. So when I look at the chart and I look at the moon, wherever the moon is for me right now, I can see the reflection in my inner felt experience. I'm going to leave it there, and I hope you've enjoyed this video, and you can let me know if you want where Uranus is transiting for you, what house it's in, or if you want to tell me where your Chiron is transiting right now. That would be interesting too. Thanks for watching.